In this video, I will explain how to use the tax-exempt concepts handout to study for the tax part of the second quiz for this course. You can find the handout in the content for week 3. Under Activities, click on Legal Issues for Public Charities, Tax-Exempt Concepts. The chart in this handout identifies legal issues in the left column, the applicable law that applies to the legal issue in the second column, a brief explanation of the law in the third column, and the potential consequences of violating the provision or the issue in the far right column. The handout includes endnotes that show the section of law or the section of the Treasury regulation where the language comes from. For example, here under the exempt purposes issue, it lists some of the exempt purposes: religious, charitable, scientific, and the public interest. If you hover over the superscript number, you can see the reference to the Treasury regulation where that language comes from or where that language is explained further. You can also click on that superscript number and jump to the end note to find that description. Or if you print this out, that'll be on the last page at the end. Next, I want to show you what it looks like if I go to that Treasury regulation and I want to look up what it says about charitable. So I'm going to go back to the course content and scroll up under the readings. There's a link to the Treasury regulation here. So in the handout, if I want to look at charitable, hover over that one, it's under Treasury Regulation 1.501C3-1D2. So then I go over to the Treasury Regulation, and this is where it says, oh, let me make this a little bit bigger. Okay, I made this bigger, and up here it starts at section 1.501C3-1. I also made this list because it gets a little confusing the way the IRS and the Treasury regulations are published. They don't use indentations the way I'm used to seeing them, so sometimes I make a chart of the code sections as I go through, and it helps me keep track of where I am. So it starts at 1.501C3-1. The whole thing from page 11 to the top of page 17, all of that is section 1.501C3-1. Within that section, it's broken down into subsections like A, 1 and 2. Here's A, 1 and 2. Then B, 1, little I, corresponds to B1, little I. And then at the top of that, page 11 is B1, 1B, 1I, little a in italics. That's this section. And then little b, then here's 1B, 1, 2. Here's 1B, 1, 3. And then it goes to the next page, 1B, 1, 4. This is 1B, 1, 4. There's a 1B, 1, 5. And then 1B, 2. So it takes a little bit of searching to find. We want 1D. So here's 1C. And 1D starts on page 14. 1D, exempt purposes. So 1D1 is in general. We wanted 1D2, where it talks about charitable. Here's charitable defined. So when you're studying for the quiz, it will be very helpful for you to have this Treasury Regulation 1.501C3-1 next to you, and you really need to work through the Treasury regulation when you're working with some of the questions on the quiz on the study guide. Let me show you an example. Here's the Quiz 2 study guide. On page 3, there are practice questions that deal with the Treasury regulation, section 1.501C3-1. This third question down here asks, under those sections, a charitable organization meets the operational test if its only activity is coordinating Bible studies and Christian religious classes for refugees. True or false? So you would definitely need to use that definition of charitable and some other sections within the Treasury regulation in order to answer the question. You'll find specific examples in the Treasury regulation that will deal with some of the specific questions that are going to be on the quiz, but some of the questions will require more of your analysis and putting pieces together. Another part of the quiz asks about the tax-exempt concepts and the consequences. And you see here there are 3 choices. There are 7 questions that deal with this fictional organization called Blankets for You, and all of them are select all that apply. Let me illustrate what I mean by that. On the first page of the tax-exempt concepts handout, I discuss an adverse determination where you apply for recognition of exemption and the IRS denies your application, or a revocation if you have been accepted as a tax-exempt organization but your status is revoked for some reason. Under either of those situations, if those are the consequences, you would have revocation of tax-exempt status, or here, revocation. But you would also have imposition of tax and or penalties, because under a revocation, the organization's net income is taxed at corporate rates, and donors can't deduct contributions. So the tax consequences to the organization, revocation, and imposition of tax. Whenever one of the answers to the questions on the quiz is a C, you have to select B also, because as the chart indicates over here, any revocation includes imposition of tax. The reverse, however, is not true. In other words, you can have an A without a B or a C, and you can have a B without an A or a C. But whenever you have a C, you should also have a B. I hope that makes sense.